going to do my little Zoom thing here. Spotlight for everyone, Bob.
There I am, spotlit. It's always been my ego ambition.
I got to turn my brightness down on my screen. It's bright.
Spoken like the true friend that you are. Dan and I go way, way back.
So I want to try this new thing here. Jonathan, just behave yourself. Stop marking up the board. I called it mosaic. I don't know. I just made it up because what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes to do two things. One is learn how to use the raise hand feature in 30 seconds or not more than a minute. Introduce one thing about yourself, your perspective, or your purpose to the whole group. But then don't duplicate what another person said. Expand the mosaic with other perspectives.
I'm really interested in leadership and conflict. That's real focus on that. I live in Canada, in Ottawa, the capital.
I'm interested in anything that fosters development in individuals and groups.
Anything that shows how we create our own circumstances and how we can change them from within.
So my interest is in embodied leadership and anything that looks at how we achieve greater equanimity.
And I'm interested in all the landscape that lies beyond the creative.
I'm interested in game-changing conversations that help cultivate whole self with whole systems.
So what's the possibility that you notice is the question. And the companion question can be, what should you change now or sooner? Or how might you respond to that possibility? And here we go. And it'll be about just about 10 minutes in total. So enjoy, and we'll see you back, and then we'll talk to Bob. Welcome, everyone. Let me just take a minute to kind of share the way I am thinking of what Bob's going to talk to us about, but I don't actually know the details. So, and I did show this to Bob, so he said, I won't take you down left field or, off the playing field altogether. So when Bob talks about unity, I think of it in the context of the adult development path that we're all familiar with, or most of us here are familiar with. And I always think of that path not in 6 stages or 11 stages. I just think of it really, really simply. We become a person, and we have this sense of who our identity is. Then our identity evolves as adults or self-authored people, and we begin to appreciate the more full aspects of who we are, and our relationships change. But there's this third stage that we can explore, and I think it's this third stage that Bob is going to explore with us today. So with that, I will now close my window. And Bob, this is your show. I'm here to serve as the Zoom Meister.
Well, welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you. I see some familiar faces, some old friends, new friends. It's great to be with you. I got a lot to share, and I am going to use slides. We'll do a short chunk, then we'll put you into breakout groups of 3 or 4 to talk about what I've said. Then we'll come back and do some more, and then back to breakout groups and so on. So that's the process that Tom likes to use for this. So let me share screen. And you should be seeing a PowerPoint deck there, huh?
Got it.
All right. So this is what I want to talk about, this later stage leadership. But as I started to really explore it.
Oop, Bob, you got to unmute. Sorry, I accidentally muted all. I didn't think it would mute you as the co-host. I can't unmute you, Bob. You have to unmute yourself. There you go. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So as I started to really explore this integral leadership, I realized that in later stages, the ego begins to get more and more porous to higher dimensions of ourselves and of reality. And it's actually included in our mission statement, the mission statement of Leadership Circle. We exist to evolve the conscious practice of leadership to steward the planet and awaken us all to our inherent unity. It's bookended with this consciousness and unity. And you could play with it a little bit differently and say, we exist to awaken. Like we're here to awaken to our inherent unity. And from that, consciously lead and steward this planet. And so I think later stages start to touch in, begin to have a kind of tacit relationship with dimensions that in the spiritual traditions are called unity. So I want to explore that with you. And I also want to talk at some point a little bit about the emergent science and how science and these various spiritual dimensions have been, are integrating in a way that's amazing, because fundamental reality is a unity and it is conscious. So everything is conscious. Everything. This is the emergent view. The universe is a conscious entity. That consciousness is not an artifact, some random coincidence. It's emergent because it's there from the get-go fundamentally. So we start with that, like the starting place for a new model of leadership needs to start with the fundamental presumption of our inherent unity, of the inherent unity of all things. We're in a time in history where we need to radically rewrite civilization, society, and our relationship with the planet. We literally need to build from ground up, from 0 point, from first principle up. The old order is imploding. Back to normal is a death sentence. And this requires a new level of leadership. Leadership today is challenged not only with VUCA or BANI. It is challenged with that. We have to lead successfully in the midst of all that. But in doing so, we have to righten the planet. We have to position our organization in a way that's part of the solution, that contributes to a thriving, equitable, just, sustainable future for all inhabitants of this planet. And so I want to talk a little bit about the kind of leadership that I think that requires. Now, unity manifests as polarity. I think of polarity as trinity, equal and opposites emerging from one, from unity. And the primary polarity in the universe is the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, which is in physics language, spin. There's right-hand spin, there's left-hand spin, and you get this dynamic of energy, which is the yin and the yang, and it's the ancient symbol from the East, right? And so that's one polarity. There are billions of them, but another primary polarity in the universe is expansion and contraction. Somebody talked about embodied leadership. Well, I think our task is to embody more and more fully presence here, physically, unity, who we most ultimately are. And so that's moving into density, into form, and then expanding awareness, radiating out awareness. So this expansion, contraction, and I think of stages now in terms of this expansion, contraction polarity, which, as we'll talk about later, I think now of them as fields of information in the same way that physics talks about fields of information. And so we've done, if you're familiar with our work, we've explored the reactive creative, the movement from reactive to creative. I want to spend time today saying, what is this move from creative to integral? Without all the developmental theory, let's just move right into it. And so the first thing that I think emerges here is our relationship with identity and with a sense of purpose shifts. So I want to talk about the primary dynamic of this being pulled forth into an emergent future, called forth, and called deeper into shadow, into our individual trauma, into our collective trauma. So it's both an awakening aspirational journey of creation and a healing journey. And those two things are intimately intertwined. I think of this as two currents in an energy sense, the ascending current and the descending current. Electricity flows both directions. It's actually a spin field. This higher purpose, this call to something emergent. Now, in earlier stages of development, we talk about identity as being organized outside in. You define me. I'm authored by others, more than I am aware and more than I am internally self-authored. When that moves on, in Bob Keegan's language, we moved into a self-authoring operating system, where now I'm focused on being an ever more authentic expression of this self that I'm discovering I am. I'm focused on a vision of what I'm about, a deep sense of purpose, my values, and so on. And I'm really working to become that. And at the later stage, so that's authored by others, self-authored, and we move into integral, especially informed by unity, we become authored. We surrender to being authored by something larger than ourselves. An emergent future which we can only dimly perceive, that's emerging at the edge of the unknown. It's authoring me now. I'm its servant. And so the language is what wants its way with me now. I was recently talking with Bill Adams, my friend, partner, co-author. Bill, and I was telling him some stories of my life that he hadn't heard before. And he sat back, and if you know Bill, he can really drop in when he really chooses to listen. And he just dropped in. He said, "You know what I get from that, Bob? You've just kept saying yes." And I realized that that was true, that I thought I was authoring my life. Now I understand it more, that it's been authoring me, and my job is to say yes. And so I'm in another phase of that, of saying yes to what's trying to emerge. I hear it in my meditation every day, insistent. This is what you're to do. This is who you are. This is what needs to come through now. And while I don't understand that, I can feel its pull. And so this is the relationship with both purpose and this ascending current, the current of our aspirations, our vision, our sense of what we're here to do, and our identity. So we're no longer self-authored, we're being authored by. And that expands into a much wider identity, which we'll explore. So then there's the descending current, which is the current. There's many ways to talk about this, but I want to talk about it more as the descent into shadow. And that the work at reactive to creative is the work from reactive to creative works with a layer of identity that's right at that level, which has to do with our beliefs and our assumptions and the way we construct an outside-in operating system. So we begin to see how I'm made up by your expectations. I need your approval. I got to be perfect on results. Those kinds of self-limiting beliefs have their roots in deeper wounds, some of which we got in this lifetime, some of which are transgenerational, even cultural. And so the work at this stage is to take on the most disowned parts of ourselves, the parts we're most afraid to look at, to feel, to be present with. We just did a 3-day workshop. We called it Integral Coaching. On the morning of day 2, we stepped into this deep process work, and it was the most intense and beautiful work I've ever been a part of in my career. It was working with Nicholas Janney, who some of you may know. He's a master at this territory. And we stayed in very deep bioenergetic process from 8:30 in the morning until 1:30 in the afternoon. And then again for a few hours the next morning. And so what happens when we start to this shift, I realize I'm not merely this authentic self, and I have that, but I also have equal and opposite parts of me, parts that are terrified, parts that are deeply wounded, parts that are racist, parts that are sexist, parts that would do you harm. And these are not small energies. When we drop into them, they're huge. And so I move from this sort of monolithic sense of self, this high integrity, authentic self, into I'm a collection of opposites in tension. I'm the whole mix. I'm an ecology of it all. And the beauty in that is that then I become a microcosm of the whole system. And so my capacity to project drops away. Oh, you have that too? Let's talk. I see that part of you in me. The whole system out there, the dysfunction, the function or dysfunction that I see out there in the system is microcosmed in me. I'm a microcosm of the whole thing. And this puts us in a very different relationship with being a transformative agent in the midst of all that. And that also opens up new pathways in terms of dialogue. I said projection ends. So 2 markers here. 1, I realize self is partial, but so is my perspective partial. The reason we're in embedded, somebody talked about loving working in conflict. The reason we're in perhaps a long-term embedded conflict that seems unresolvable is because my perspective is partial. I need the correction of my opponent or even my enemy, perceived enemy. And so I am the whole system. My perspective is partial. And I enter dialogue to learn, to listen. I'm developing, this is another marker for this stage, I'm developing a capacity for the unknown, or working in the unknown space. The futures that we are trying to create, we don't know yet. We're working with organizations all over the world. The challenges they're taking on are immense. We were just meeting with Honda last week, and they're literally calling the new vision a second founding. They're the largest producer of internal combustion engines in the world, and they're going to go all electric. 85% of that by 2035. And the entire car is going to be recyclable, so no waste. They're going to be a carbon-free company. And no one will die in one of their vehicles. This is their vision. No fatalities. Nobody knows how to do that. And so what's required is a capacity to enter together into that unknown with this emergent future beckoning us forward, and listen together to create a resonant field, a coherent, safe, high order field. I'll talk more about that, where the information of that future can find us. We break through with a new idea that none of us had when we walked in the room. I've seen it happen. Whole new visions emerge. And so this collective capacity to listen to the field that we cohere together and let it inform us. That's dialogue. Capacity with the unknown. My perspective is partial. I can no longer project an enemy because I am the whole system and you are me and I am you. I see that now. Let's talk. Let's really talk. This is a very high form of leadership. I think it's what happened at Reykjavik. I won't get into the whole story, but Gorbachev shows up there, I think, already into this level of leadership himself. And he walks in, and we all know what was going on with the arms race. And he says, I'm here to deprive you of an enemy. I disarm unilaterally, deal with it. And he and Reagan walked out as friends. Now, this statement is a statement only an integral leader can make. At reactive, we're polarizing, we're demonizing. We see that in our governments now around the world. Very polarized. At creative, we're championing a position, a vision of the world. At integral, I'm here to, I see the dance we're in. You build bombs, we build bombs. You do this, we do the same thing in a different way. Let's just end the dance. I refuse to dance. And then everything rearranges around that. That's a leveraged statement that can't be found from earlier stages of development. And it's the heart of dialogue. New futures emerge in that kind of presence. Okay, and so that's the model so far. There's more to it. I want to move into some of the science and the science behind intuition and this collective listening to the field that I'm talking about. But before we do that, I'm going to come off screen. Tom, you can put us in groups of 3 or 4 for 15 minutes or so, and then we'll come back from that.
I'm a Gen X 77, so I remember the Iceland meeting. You know, it was like covered unbelievably and really couldn't comprehend it, but now I comprehend it. Interestingly enough, Rocky 3 was released several months back in May 82, and the meeting took place in October 82. So there was certainly some priming or preparation going on. And I had a near-death experience many years ago. And at that moment, without ever realizing, I focused on integrality. I guess that came something from the very, very deep conscience, but also accepting a possible death, but choosing not to die. I mean, won't take much airtime.
Beautiful. I think in the sense of the deeper traditions, wisdom traditions, our task is to die before we die, which is actually to become more and more fully embodied. I'm understanding embodiment differently now. Like we're in an incarnational process, and all of us is not here yet. That we can keep incarnating more and more of our fundamental, most fundamental self. Ultimately, that's unity. There's only one emerging as all things. So how do we embody and presence that? Which ultimately means that the personality self with which we spend most of our time identified falls away.
But at least as a human being, I'm always predicting what's going to happen next.
Yeah. And in this territory we're moving into, you have no idea.
But predicting.
Think about a company like Syngenta. They've been a chemical company in a world that no longer wants chemicals. So they've, partly by necessity, but also by a deep, I think, conviction, they have formed a vision of renewing the earth through agriculture. Literally feeding a growing population safely and in a way that reforests the earth and replenishes the soil, which would have huge carbon impact. And they're working with climate scientists. The Nature Conservancy is deeply involved, and nobody knows how to do it. This is the relationship leaders have with the future now. It's not predictable, it's unknowable, it's unfigure-outable. And yet we must break through urgently. And so all of our strategies to know, to try to predict, fall short here. And that's why I think that the future of leadership now is integral, that what's required in the world is a post-creative kind of leadership. That creative isn't complex enough for the challenges we're now in. And it's necessary. It's a huge step, and most leaders are making, in the process of making it.
And say that we need reactive leadership, more grounded in integral, but more reactive leadership, like a gyroscope that is always calibrating to what is happening around it.
So right at the end of our group, Catherine said something that made me have a question. She said, I trust the universe and I trust myself. And that made me wonder, is it possible to trust the unity or the universe or the greater more than you trust yourself? Like, what if I don't trust myself? Can I trust the greater more than I trust myself?
Which self? I'm posing that as a real question.
And I don't have an answer that I can give you here and now, obviously.
Yeah,
but.
no, it's a great question. And ultimately, which self are we navigating by? And ultimately, as we'll explore, is there a difference? Is there a difference between the universal and the self? This is where it gets really interesting as we start to move into integral, because one of the things that happens is we begin to see, it's another marker, that our self-narrative is a construction, that our identity at whatever level is a construction. We're making it up, usually in a way that's far too small for us. One Sufi mystic says, you think you know who you are, you don't have a clue. Or George Bernard Shaw says it even differently, only the shallow know themselves. You think you know who you are, you don't have a clue. You are the divine elephant with amnesia, trying to live in an anthole. This is precise mystical language. You are the divine elephant with amnesia, trying to live in an anthole. You are the one, emergent. You are the divine, living in an identity that's far too small for you. So when you say, which self am I trusting, the universe or myself? This Sufi mystic would say, well, not two, not separate, not other, no difference. And what I'm suggesting is that unity in that sense is a stage beyond integral, but we start to get premonitions. We start to get porous as identity starts to get thinner and we deconstruct our well-honed narrative identity. We're much more open to being infused or informed by a larger reality that is ourself. But it's not a separate self in the way that we've worked to cohere.
So Bob, maybe we can move into the next segment. Thank
We're
you.
on the same page. I want to go there because the next move in this is into intuition, into why I'm using the word unity informed. I think while intuition can open up at any stage of development, it's a capacity we have. It's largely dismissed, especially in Western culture. And as that expands more and more around the world, we're losing touch with this meta capacity. But at this level of development, it can become a superpower. The ability to pull in information, as Webster says, without reference to data, to access information directly, to be informed by the universe. And that sounds really woo-woo, but it's actually now more and more scientifically confirmed. So I want to just play with some of this science. I woke up on retreat a few months ago, or a few years ago. I look up in the darkness, and there in big yellow letters was E equals MC squared. And then I thought, well, I'm on retreat. Maybe I should pay attention. And it began a process of getting downloads about physics, intuitions that had to do very specifically about physics. At the bow wave of many disciplines in the sciences is an emerging understanding of reality fundamentally. And it started with quantum mechanics. And one of the founders of quantum mechanics was Niels Bohr. And he said, everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. Now, I want to talk about this briefly because I think our paradigm, our current paradigm of reality is so false that it literally cuts us off from these higher meta capacities that need to come online now in order for us to, in the unknown, intuit the emergent future and innovate it. To be informed by this reality that we are. So, first thing I learned was that matter is not material. This is really hard to get your head around, but let me just kind of give you a glimpse of it. Every molecule in your body is 99.999999999% empty space. So you are mostly empty space. Now we'll correct that because space isn't empty, but hold on. So I just did this experiment. So if this is you, this is the space of your body. Here's you at 90% empty space. Here's you at 99% empty space. Here's the material you at 99.9% empty space. And the material you at 99.99% empty space. The pixel on the screen doesn't even light up. And we're just getting started here. We have to repeat that 10 times or divide that little, whatever's left there, by 10 billion. That's the amount of material that's in the space of you. So just drop out of your head for a minute. And drop in. Maybe close your eyes for a minute to the stillness of your body, to the rhythm of your breath. Put your attention in the heart space. Feel the spaciousness that's there. You are not your body. You are not material. You are not who you think you are or what you think you are. You are this spaciousness. Just try to take that in and start to see and feel how what the wisdom traditions have been saying about the fundamental nature of who we are is consistent now with what science is suggesting. Another way, you can open your eyes now, another way to look at that is that if we took all 7.6 billion people on the planet and we took out all of the space from all of their bodies, all the space between the protons and neutrons and electrons, and we compressed it, all 7.6 billion of us would fit in the space of a sugar cube. And that could easily dissolve into your morning cup of coffee. And even that's not enough, because once you go inside one of those protons, you're back into vast empty space again. There's nothing there. They call them quarks, 3 quarks in a proton, but they describe them as virtual particles. No spatial extent is the language. So physics uses the language of particles, but puts it in quotes, and they all know they're not talking about a particle. They're talking about an energy that behaves like a particle. And so Einstein said this, he said, concerning matter, we've been all wrong. What we've called matter is energy, whose vibration has been lowered so as to be perceptible to the senses. Get that? Energy at a lower vibrational pattern that appears visible to our senses. Matter is spirit reduced to the point of visibility. There is no matter. And this is now standard quantum physics, quantum field theory. So more fundamental than matter are fields. So remember I said empty space is not empty. No, it's a field. There is no empty space anywhere in the universe. The entire universe is a field that is emerging everything that we see and don't see, right? And so the universe doesn't speak English or Chinese or Spanish or Greek or Latin. It speaks frequency. It's a vibrational field. And that these things we call particles are emergent patterns in that field. The language is they're excitations and interactions of a quantum field. They're not really a particle. They're standing wave patterns in a universal field. And these particles have no spatial extent. They emerge in relationship. Everything's related to everything, like your wave influences my wave. Every wave on the ocean is influencing the shape and emergence of every other wave. So the fundamental presumption in our current mental model is separateness. Everything is dead. Everything is vast, empty space, particles somehow colliding and forming all of this complexity. In the emergent model, nothing is separate. Everything emerges from an unbroken wholeness. A proton or electron is an emergent property, a coherent energy structure in a universal field. It's not separate from, it is an emergence of the field. Every quote, particle. And so everything codepends. Everything is in relationship. Everything co-emerges. So contrary to our current mental model of separateness and difference, there's an inherent unbroken unity that is reality. It's who and what we are. Now, there's also an equation in physics that's as famous as E equals mc squared. I won't get into it, but it equates frequency with energy. Once you know the frequency of light, you can predict its energy. It's like a microwave has more energy than a radio wave because it's higher frequency. And so in quantum field theory, they did a calculation about how much energy is in a square centimeter, 1 cubic centimeter, like a sugar cube size, right? The amount of energy in 1 cubic centimeter of, quote, empty space is more than all the energy tied up in all the mass of the universe. Now, this is where, if quantum mechanics hasn't shocked you yet, you don't understand it. The amount of energy in 1 cubic centimeter of empty space is more energy than all the mass of all the galaxies in the universe, by a wide margin, by 38 orders of magnitude. This is unfathomable. So we are literally emerging from a nearly infinite field of energy. And more fundamental than that now in physics is information. That energy is information. I don't understand all this yet, but this is the language of physics. It's the language kind of around black holes, for example. What happens to the information that goes into a black hole? So there's an equivalence between energy and information. So think about that. How much energy is in that 1 cubic centimeter of empty space? How much information, therefore, is in that 1 cubic centimeter? And all the information in this vast field is distributed holographically and non-locally. Now, this is how everything is informationally all connected all the time. So we're familiar with holograms, right? This is a picture of a elephant beamed into a circus in Germany, I think. It's amazing, huge image, right? Well, I won't get into all the technicalities about how a hologram is made, but basically this image is projected through a plate, and the image emerges in 3D space. How that plate gets made is, I don't want to get into that, but here's what the plate looks like. It doesn't look like an elephant. It's a standing wave pattern. It's a picture of the light field, the coherent light field, that when you shine a laser through it, the elephant reemerges. So this is what your eyes see. They don't see the elephant. They see a wave pattern, a wave interference pattern, waves intersecting with waves. And when waves intersect, they share all their information with each other. And so this is how it looks to be what reality looks like. Now, the interesting thing about a hologram is that you can break this plate in half. You can break it in half again. No matter how small you break it, you get the whole elephant. You don't get a part of the elephant. You don't get its leg or its foot or the trunk, or you get the whole elephant. So this wave pattern is fractally in every part of this film. And this is the current model of an informational universe. Everything is a fractal. So the part, you, the proton, the part is the whole. It has the whole fractally represented in every part. You are not separate. You are the whole thing, appearing here as a coherent waveform. You are information and energy and frequency, and you are not material in the way that we classically think about it. Furthermore, information is non-local or entangled, they call it. Now, this is one of the most surprising discoveries of quantum world, that everything is connected to everything at a speed faster than the speed of light. Let me explain that. So take one experiment they did where they take a photon of light and they shoot it down a fiber optic one direction, and they shoot an entangled particle. How they entangle them is, I don't know, but they're entangled. What that means is if you can change one, the other changes. And so they shoot one photon this way and the other photon this way. And 6 miles apart, the fiber optic branches, right and left. And then they end up at the location that they're being shot toward. Well, in these experiments, it's random whether they choose right or left. So half the time they go right, half the time they go left. But what's astounding is every time, 100% of the time, they make the same choice. And we know that somehow communication between them, communication in quotes, because it is happening faster than the speed of light, because we know how fast light travels, and 12 miles, and this is far faster. It may be instantaneous. We don't understand the mechanism here, but this is fundamental to the nature of the universe, and that it's actually becoming so practical now that in quantum computers, they're able to transfer information over a 6-mile distance from one computer to another, simply using entanglement, with no wires, with no electromagnetic signaling, with nothing, just these electrons change, these change, and you can communicate and transfer information instantly across vast distances. This is non-locality. So the entire universe is a holograph of information that's getting constantly updated all the time. Every part is constantly updated with the whole. This is the nature of the field. One of the people who's been really helpful for me in learning this is Jude Currivan. She's a physicist, archaeologist. This is one of the more brilliant people I've ever had the privilege of meeting. And her book, Information at the Center of Creation, The Cosmic Hologram. Jude actually goes on in this book to explain how the laws of thermodynamics are being rewritten into the laws of infodynamics. Remember, energy is information. So all the stuff around energy transfer, which we call laws of thermodynamics, can be reformulated now as information movement. And one of the things she's saying is that as the universe is expanding, because holographically the plate, right, this plate that we put the information into, the perimeter is the plate. And black hole, this goes to understanding of black holes, I won't get into it, but as the boundary expands, more information informs the universe. And so entropy, which is the expansive movement of the universe, has its equal and opposite movement of entropy, more information emerging, content coming into the space. And therefore it naturally is self-organizing into higher order complexity, which we see. Molecules, larger molecules, DNA, life, sentience, conscious beings. And so far from our mental models of a dead universe and randomness as its primary evolutionary mechanism, we see a living conscious universe that's learning. And it's distributing that learning instantly everywhere. And it's learning through us, that we are in a co-creative relationship with the whole thing. Now, even more fundamental than that is consciousness. This is Max Planck, one of the founders of quantum mechanics. Get this statement, it's a profound statement. More fundamental than energy, matter, time, and space is consciousness. So even more fundamental than this quantum field of time, space, energy, matter, interaction is awareness itself, consciousness. That quantum physics, in his language, presumes a deeper consciousness. And therefore, as things emerge, they emerge with awareness. And so literally what Emerson said years ago is now becoming a bow wave in science, that we lie in the lap of immense intelligence. We are the receivers of its truth and the organs of its activity. This is no longer metaphysics or philosophy. It's the emergent physics and quantum biology and quantum neurology. And it's cohering you. You are a field of information at many dimensions. You are the entire spectrum of frequencies, from the lowest frequency, which appears physical, to the highest frequency, the quantum field. All of that is cohering what we call our body, our self, emerging from consciousness itself. So fundamentally, you are consciousness emerging through this unified field into a sentient form. You are a microcosm of the whole thing. You are instantly updated with the whole thing. You are not separate from the whole. The whole is you. A localized form of itself. Now, into that picture, we talk about intuiting the future, finding breakthroughs to unknowable problems, unfigure-outable problems. And so the capacity I'm suggesting that needs to emerge in this later form of leadership is the ability to tap that field, to get coherent with it and let the information that we need find us. And this has been well described in the sciences. I could go on here with quotes from scientists and mathematicians, but Einstein said it this way: the only real valuable thing is intuition. The intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. Most of what he created, he got. He saw, it came to him, and then he had to figure it out. I spent 4 years in a school of energy healing, where it was all about opening up our pathways to higher sensory perception, and then working very specifically in the human energy field for healing effect. And I was its remedial student. I went in there, man, I thought, this is a lot of, I don't know. I didn't know if I would be anything. Barbara blew me away on day one. She said, the body doesn't give off an auric field. The auric field precipitates the body. That these higher energy domains or frequencies that are the quantum field are actually precipitating and cohering what we call the as Einstein said, it's now low enough frequency to be perceptible to the senses. I didn't realize this, but Barbara was a physicist. So she was talking physics here. This is how manifestation happens. This is how things emerge in space and time. And so we spent time trying to really open up intuitive perception. And one of the things I've been experimenting with now is, are there certain practices from the contemplative traditions, from the energetic traditions, are there specific practices which can expand mind and body, raise the frequency of your field to be more coherent with what is trying to come in, what's trying to emerge? That's called intuition. It's how E=mc² showed up. So I've been actually mapping brainwave patterns in meditational states. So this is my brain in different forms of meditation. This is from a device that'll measure your brainwaves accurately. And as you can see, there's at some point about 2/3 of the way into this meditation, it changes dramatically. And that's when I shifted from one form of meditation practice to another. So you literally now can start to say, okay, how do we run our field, our energy through us, get more and more open and accessible to the information that's in the field? And I think that's a learnable practice. 99 times I think and find nothing. I stop thinking, swim in silence, and the truth comes to me. I just had the privilege. In fact, I put it up. We're going to put this interview up on our website this week. I've been interviewing some really astonishing people. This is one of them. Is Federico Fagin. He's an engineer, physicist, and he's credited with being the inventor of the microprocessor, the technology that allowed the microprocessor to actually be built and then to build one. And he's credited with that. He went to Intel, and he's the genius behind Intel. He also invented things like touch pads, touch screens, fingerprint biometrics. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's an amazing inventor, creator, leader, person. Late in life, I won't get into it, he gets into it in this book. He has a profound spiritual experience. He was just getting a glass of water in the middle of the night. He went back to bed, and as he laid down, the whole universe opened up. He had a full-on mystical experience. Now, he's a classically trained physicist engineer. He was operating in what I'm calling a classical, traditional mental model of reality. Everything's dead. It's all it's all material, and so on. And he was treated to a view of reality that few of us get. And he knew instantly that everything was alive and everything was made of this one. He doesn't even have words to describe it, this one scintillating light. It's really love, he said. It's the love that came from me. But what astounded him was, this came from me. How could this love come from me? And I was both the source and the observer at the same time. Like, I am the world and I'm a point of view on the world. This was his language. This is the non-separateness of reality. I am a point of view. I am a kind of localized entity, and I'm the whole thing. How can that be? Well, it took him 20 years to unpack that, and now he's just published in Italian, it's not yet out in English, a book on physics. He gets into it a little bit in this book, Silicon, but he's now written a physics book on starting from the presumption that reality is conscious and that everything has awareness. Every proton has a level of awareness at its level of scale. and agency and identity. And then when things combine, that gets more complex. That sense of agency, identity, and awareness gets more complex until it self-organizes into something as aware as a human being. That it's not a random artifact, it's fundamental. And the whole thing is alive. Every part, quote part. There are no part. Everything is a part whole point of view and the whole at the same time. Everything is a part whole of one. This is his language. And so this is the reality in which we operate. I think the new form of leadership learns more and more how to access these dimensions of ourselves through intuition that becomes innovation. We invent a new future, and we have to. The one we're moving toward is a death sentence. It's a catastrophe. So the current order is imploding. And we have a limited amount of time in which to reinvent ourselves, to reinvent our world. And nobody knows what that new future looks like. And we have to go there. And we have to invent our way there. Breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough, consistent with a fundamental principle of our inherent oneness. We are not separate. And that principle then gets embedded into systemic design. How do we design a world from first principle? We're all each other. No separate anything. There is no away. There is no over there or other. Diversity is a dance on a beautiful dance on a stage of unity. This is a fundamentally different understanding of reality with higher order capacities for manifesting results. Let's see, where am I? Yeah, I'll do this really quickly. It gets to presence and it gets to coherent and our ability to be the change. There's a body of work in this research on psychic phenomenon or intuitive type capability, one of which is they did a study on what's the effect of staring at someone. Do you actually feel it or not? So they put one person in a room with all kinds of machinery to measure their autonomic responses, like lie detectors, stuff like that. And there's another person in another room who's looking at them on a screen, and at random intervals is instructed to stare at this person on the screen. And then they're trying to measure whether the machines that are strapped up to this woman in this picture actually register it. She doesn't know she's being stared at. She doesn't know when she might be being stared at. And sure enough, the machine registers a response. And it does so consistently that the odds in all the experiments they've done on this, the odds beyond chance of that just being random is 3.8 million to 1. So we literally affect each other through this field that we're talking about. They got really curious about this because it's an anxiety response of being stared at. I thought, what happens if we get the people together and get them to know each other? And they did that, and they repeated the experiment. And this time they had the same 3.8 million to 1 success rate, except the response was in the opposite direction. They became more calm rather than into more an anxiety. And so they took that even further. They started to say, well, what if we can connect with people and bring them into greater levels of coherence? And they experimented with people who suffer from a high anxiety disorders. And they found that just people at a distance, connecting with them, were able to calm them down as much as self-soothing techniques. And so this capacity to be present and connected, what they found was that the most coherent order person, a person who had the most coherent brain patterns in this case, always prevailed. They brought greater coherence into the person who was less coherent or more phonetic. Now, this has everything to do with leadership because we've been told, oh yeah, this one, they have these machines that measure these now. They have machines that measure changes in fields of groups. And I won't get into the technology, but that's a whole nother body of research. They literally people can influence these machines just by their level of presence and coherence with each other or intention. It's telekinesis. On 9/11, these machines that are in labs all over the world went off the charts, measuring a response in the human energy field. These are the charts directly from that day. And so we are influencing others just by our state of presence. And as leaders, then the question becomes, how do I show up? Can I show up with a level of presence, embodied unity? That coheres a field, that allows for the highest of what wants to happen in this meeting to happen. And this is dialogue. How do we, now my thinking is, and we're practicing, how do we access state together, expanded states of awareness together, and construct conversation where we're listening to what wants to emerge in the space for breakthroughs. So collective intuition, enhanced by individuals' capacity to be intuitive, but also to presence a level of coherence which allows us to break through. I watched this happen in a senior team once. It was astounding. At the end of 3 days, they were sitting around going, nobody came in with this vision. This is beyond anything. And there were tears in their eyes. I think this is the future of leadership, where our contemplation becomes our transformation. It's inspired and informed from higher dimensions of ourselves that are trying to emerge here. And it's inherently just. This way of operating moves toward justice. As King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think as we clean out the shadow dimensions in ourselves and the light of higher intuition, grace, energy, light meets the shadows, both individual and collective, then we redesign systems that are inherently just and nonviolent. And that takes leadership of great presence in order to operate this way. And this is what I mean by unity-informed integral presence or leadership. Yogananda put it this way: words saturated with sincerity, conviction, faith, and intuition are highly explosive vibration bombs. Now, he lived through World War I and World War II. So he's talking about a different kind of bomb here.
I'm going to interject a pause. Where the natives are processing all the things that you're saying, and I'd like to give them some of that space. So.
Yep. Well, I am finished. So
good timing then.
Yeah.
Wow. So much. You know, I'm sure everybody in this audience or this group is coming maybe from different perspectives, and some of them the same. That's like the universe, right? I'm going to lead it off with asking Bob a question about, you know, all these things can really change our sense of who we are and where we are, and it's easy to get lost in the magic of it. I'll say I don't say that negatively. I just say it's It just seems unreal to our experience. So what if all these things are true, what does that mean? What about that? How does that change our choices today?
It points toward application. We haven't talked about, okay, here's how you do it today.
Right.
But it points toward application. So we were in a workshop recently with a bunch of coaches, and we had spent, as I mentioned, doing some deep shadow work, which opens up the center channel in the field, unblocks, cleans out, get a lot more flow. And then we practice progressively different energetics to drop deeper into the field. And then be present with each other, do coaching with each other from that presence. And people reported a level of connection, unity, presence with each other that they had never, ever experienced, not even close. And we didn't have to talk application to coaching. They knew it instantly. Their very presence. See, healing happens when we just sit that way with another person. When they're in their deepest shadow or wound or whatever it is they're really having to face, it takes real courage. Mostly we try to do something to be helpful. And mostly that distracts. And what they were finding was just being so radiantly present was the magic. And we got reports back from, and this is becoming a consistent pattern now after 3 days of practice in this territory, where they go into a group the next week or 2 weeks later and they report back, I did the best work of my life. Magic happened. I don't know what I want. I reconstructed my coaching relationship and said, let's do it this way. And the client said, let's keep doing it that way. That was the best session we've ever had. So it's so simple. It's easy to miss the application. That when we get that unblocked, when we get that embodied presence, and it's what Bill Torbert called, in terms of stages development, called the magician level or the alchemist. These are the later stages. You have a kind of magical capability. You know just what to say. You know how to speak right into a person. You get information from the resonant connection of them, which informs you about how to be helpful. And you trust it in that moment, and then all kinds of things open up. The same can happen in a consulting situation. A colleague of mine was working with a group of, I think they were bankers. And he wasn't sure how to be helpful to the team to break through. And then he got an intuition. I need to work with this one person and do a piece of work with them. And he agreed to do it. They did the work, and that group reported, we have never had, the rest of the meeting went on, and they said, we have never had this level of creative access and openness to possibilities. This was the most creative, generative meeting we've ever had together. So there's all of these later capacities that I'm describing. Once you experience them, you know the practical import. And Gary, you've been one of those guys that has written in from some of this work and said, I get it, and your very complex role as a senior exec. So that's all I can say is there's real practical application here, and we're still uncovering it. So this,
Do I hear this correct? Maybe this is a way of saying it, that if simply taking the perspective of fluidity, maybe, or singularity in energy, and being in that perspective changes the way that you perceive and the way you behave. Would that be a fair? How would you say?
perspective is mental. And there's a mental component here. And we've been in that. That's what we've been doing here. I'm talking about embodying it.
We'll say, so use the word presence then.
Right. So yes, there is a mental perspective that helps me hold it. But the more I can embody or incarnate what we've been talking about, the more can happen in the room.
Yes. Yeah, I just use perspective to be the whole, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, how about any hands? Oh, we're actually out of town. If you can you stay a few more minutes, Bob, and just take a
I can. Yeah.
I don't know where the feature for raise hands is.
That's okay. Deepa, your hand is up.
Yeah. So the question is, when information becomes so available to us in quantum physics as we collapse time and space, at what stage of leadership does that information become overwhelming and one goes into, that's too much for me, I don't want to respond to that, versus I now have a capacity to hold all of that in me?
I don't know. I've not had it happen or seen it happen. Mostly we're in a desert of information. We're cut off from the vast capacity of what we can have access to. And part of that is our mental models, and part of that is, as a result of that, we haven't practiced in ways that can open up those possibilities. I haven't found it to be overwhelming at all. The other thing that happens is when you're accessing a higher field of resonance, it's a higher frequency, it's more information rich. That's why you get so much so quickly. One neurologist I talked to, a world leading neurologist, calls it thought balls. He had a whole breakthrough that changed our understanding of stroke epidemiology. It all came in an instant, took him 20 years to prove it out. But when you get resonant with a higher frequency, you're also at a higher processing speed. You're thinking faster, you're making meaning at a much higher rate. So you get information and process it very, very quickly. That's why you go, oh, I get it. And then you got to unpack it later. So the experience isn't one of being overwhelmed as much as it is of being like graced. Joy. It's an experience of joy.
If the only real valuable thing is intuition, do we really need this scientific theories of quantum physics to get a better understanding of that? Like, is it possible to get a better scientific understanding of what we actually can sense through the intuition? Do we need that at that point?
He didn't say intuition is the only valuable thing. He said on the road to discovery. So the discovery process, when I talked with Federico Fagin, he's quite descriptive now, especially having gone full circle and studied consciousness, right? He goes back and he watched it happen when he was inventing the physics that he's just written about as it came in. There's the balance between hard rational work that's required like the wanting to know, the needing to know, the needing to break through, the trying to figure it out, and then stepping back and being informed. And then there's the hard rational work of having to unpack that and make sense of it and bring it into application, which can be further informed. So there's this relationship or dance between the intellect, rational, figuring it out, and being informed along the way. And ideally they play together. And if you look at Ian McGillichrist's work, in our current way of operating in the West in particular, it's all intellect. And so the servant has become the master or vice versa. You know what I mean? The intellect should be the servant and it's now the master. And so both are necessary to really good science.
This might just be me, but how do you deal with the feeling of failure that I can't make it work? I've been studying this for years and I hear you and I'm like, oh my God, give me some of that. What Kool-Aid are you drinking? I can't make it work.
I think there are some simple ways to open this up, and it'd be fun to have you experiment with some of those.
Where do I sign up for that experiment?
Well, that's my commercial. We're doing a workshop next month with Donna Evans Strauss and I. And Donna's a healer, runs the Barbara Brennan School of Healing. And so I'm bringing her in to spend 3 days playing in this space and saying exploring what's the application of all of this to coaching.
My simple answer, Robin, is to follow your intuition and take small steps and challenge yourself to go where you haven't gone before, because
team that can think together at this level raises the collective intelligence well beyond the average. And that most of the time we come together, we dumb down. We interact more reactively or in a way that lowers the collective intelligence below the average. But when we can raise it, we can accelerate the creation of a future. And so let's stop there. And you want to put them in a group?
I think for 10 minutes, we don't have a lot of time yet. So why don't we
Yep.
put them in small groups and just let people explore as best they
Can you leave me out of a group?
I can.
Yep, do that. Let's you and I be a group. Or do you want to be in a group?
No, it's okay.
Go.
I'm gonna fix the do this for just a relatively short time. And I gotta move you out, Bob. Hey, Bob. Are you there? You're muted.
Send me a switch, it mutes you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So this
that's what I'm up to these days.
so it's great. I'm reading this book, by the way, just by coincidence. Oops, there it is. The Language of Symmetry, which is by a bunch of it's arts, medicine, humanities, physicists, mathematicians talking about some of these same themes. And when I hear you say expand and contract or whatever the polarity is, I think of, order and chaos as similar, I think, to the same thing, similar polarity. But it's probably because I'm just coming out of reading some of this stuff. So it's great. It's great stuff.
Well, we'll see what they do with it.
Yeah. So my question to you, I don't know if we have time though, is these are radical ideas, so it stretches a lot of our conventional thinking because we're used to being in the conventional space. And the temptation is to kind of get lost in the magic of it, I'll say. And what I'm wondering is if you have some observations about, so what does that mean? I mean, what do we do with that today?
Yeah.
Ground us back.
All right, good. Yeah, I can do that. We're getting a lot of experience in that, actually. People go through a 3-day workshop and then they write us and say, I just did the best work of my life.
If all these things are true, if we're part of, if we're just a slow structure in the energy, which I believe in the energy.
No, the physical body is, not we are.
Yeah,
the physical body is.
Yes,
we call the physical body.
Our self-experience is, but we're in relationship to much more than that. If all those things are true, then so what?
Yep.
Certainly listening. It's interesting because I'm listening and noticing and following your intuition and your instinct, and it's always been a theme for me in terms of. So I think that's maybe one of the what's. So.
Well, I'm out there on, the edge of irrelevance again, which I realized recently that's what I do. That's my role in the scheme of things. And so the so what question is still emerging for me. What's the point of this? How does it have practical application? And I can speak to that when we get back.
It's probably a nice way to end. I'm going to also do a little commercial. If you have any events or anything you want to clue people onto, do that. I'm going to spend 30 seconds just on a tiny commercial. We call it a commercial break. And it's really only the last of our Voices sessions this series. We have one more.
I wasn't sure how to respond to that one guy that was talking about the gyroscope and comets and.
Oh yeah, he's an interesting character who Vishva. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know whether, because I have some friends that are neurodiverse, I'll say, so I don't know if he's struggling to maintain reality or struggling to find the words, because he's calling it, I think English is a second language for him. So I don't know what's going on with Vishva, but he's got speaking of energy, he's got a very nice energy.
Yeah, well, I just didn't want to try to take the time to figure out what he was actually talking about. So,
yeah, no, it's fine.
And using his own language or whatever. Anyway, so I hope I didn't.
Well, I think he was thinking out loud and struggling with this idea that the synchronicity, frankly, the balance of order and chaos and energy and vibration in the world affects everything is affecting something else. And I think he was trying to get to that, what does it mean to be locally even? If the asteroid is moving, is the asteroid affecting the planets? Well,
everything's affecting everything.
Everything's affecting everything. That's right. The logical, tough conclusion too is if disorder and if disorder is always part of, if it's always order and disorder, and if disorder is part of the pattern, do we have an emergency?
Yeah, it's a good question, because in Jude's book, Gaia, which is her most recent book, Jude Currivan, she charts the entire history of the universe. And literally, it's a brilliant and very complex read. I don't understand 90% of it because it's science. It's way beyond me. But one of the things that we talked about when I interviewed her was that the great evolutionary leaps on the planet happened after destruction. And then the new was sitting there waiting. And so we may be in for a period of destruction and making room for the evolutionary leap. I don't know. Is the chaos that's ensuing just part of what has to happen, or do we have a way to? I don't know.
It gets into good and evil, which both exist, right? And we want to always bias to the good. I'm probably not going to let go of that idea for myself, but logically,
Well, there's enough evil embedded or manifesting as evil. Like I drive a car, I drive a fossil fuel, I buy stereo equipment, I do stuff that I know has consequences on the environment. So I'm part of the problem, and it's genocide. We're committing genocide on the planet and on future generations. And I'm a part of that.
I'm not okay with it.
And I'm not okay with it. So there's evil in it.
Maybe it steps into the detachment question. I wonder what Gary thinks of all this. He's in the call, Gary Colbert. But it's quite, are you conscious of what's going on, and is it what you want? Maybe.
Yeah, you can't not be part of the problem, really. I think the only real question is, can I also be part of the solution? I have to live in this world. Now I could go do the Gandhian thing and put a tent out in the woods somewhere, and that's where I'm going to live. But it's hard to impact. It's hard to function.
If your consciousness is raised and you see this, then do you trust your instinct about what you want to do? Don't second guess it. If you want to save the planet, then do that.
Breakout rooms will close in 53 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's head back, and why don't you lead a little bit of discussion, or open it up. I'll try not to say a lot in response, and then maybe a few closing statements. And then you can do your commercial first, however you want to do that.
Yeah, I'll be really quick.